Good afternoon, New York City and the World Wide Web. We are here with the second installment of the K-20 Forum. I am Dana Leong, and we are live at Life After Dark Studio here in Harlem. My co-host, as always, is Dr. Jason Gaines.
Hey, how are you doing, everybody?
My great friends from a long time. And today we are super thrilled to have the game-changing music therapist, Miss Connie Tomaino. I originally met Connie when we were sitting on a panel for Ellen Amanda's book, The Power of Music. And I was so intrigued with her work, I knew that it was only a matter of time before I would hunt her down and try to pick her brain. She is a doctor in the field of music therapy, and she's the executive director and co-founder of the Institute for Music and Neurologic Function, IMNF, and the senior vice president for music therapy at CenterLight Health System. And she is here to talk today about the power of music, the revolutionary healing power it has, and the magic that is behind her very unique system of healing people with music therapy. Thank you for being here,
Thanks.
Connie.
Yeah, thanks. And with that in mind, can you tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to this work, and even the history of your current work?
Sure. Well, I came to the field of music therapy in a sort of strange way because I was a pre-med student at Stony Brook University on Long Island, and I had been a science major, my whole life, really geeky type science person. But I played trumpet in the high school band, and when I went to college, I was going to play with one of the bands just as a side thing, and wanted to take trumpet lessons from the professor there was Ron Anderson, who played with the City Ballet. And he said, well, you can't study with me unless you're a music major. So I ended up double majoring in science and music, trumpet performance, then realizing I knew nothing about music. That all my years of accordion lessons and all the years of playing in the high school band really didn't teach me about all the amazing pieces of music, and I felt so attached to the music that I couldn't give it up. So I immersed myself, ended up with a music performance degree, but my junior year of college found out about a field called music therapy, and it just started. The field of music therapy in the United States just started in 1950 as an organized profession. People had been using music in hospitals for a long time, and people had been using music in psychotherapeutic treatments for a long time, but there wasn't an organized profession. So it just turned out that the band director at Stony Brook was the band director at NYU. NYU had just started a master's program in music therapy, and that's what led me to get my master's in music therapy, eventually my doctorate. But I think it was my background in science that caused me to look differently at how the patients I was working with responded to music. The very first people I had the opportunity to work with were people with end-stage dementia. And I was told, this is back in 1978, and I was told by the doctors and the nurses that these patients have absolutely no awareness of who they are, that their brain is totally destroyed by Alzheimer's disease, that they're basically just living bodies, being fed and watered, and don't expect anything. But my job was to play music in the room to sort of change the ambiance.
Oh, you played trumpet in the room?
No, I played actually accordion and guitar. But so I'm in this room with people who, half of them screaming, half of them tied to their wheelchairs because they, very restless and agitated. I started singing the song, and half of the group calmed down. The group half of the other people who were catatonic and non-responsive woke up, and they started singing the words. And my science brain said, what? Music is nothing but noise in the environment. If these people have no brain activity, how can they process noise as a familiar song? And not only recognize it as something familiar, but actually recall the words. I mean, these people had no language, these people had no way of communicating. And I went searching for some understanding of what it was about music that could gain access to preserve function in somebody who was deemed to have no function at all. And so it was by really this great luck that a job was opened at Beth Abraham, it was then Beth Abraham Hospital in the Bronx, And there was a neurologist there who was asking the same questions. This was Oliver Sacks, who at that point had written a book called Awakenings that was out of print and sort of underground hit with medical students, but nobody really knew about. But here was a neurologist who also saw the power of music to really reach and organize function where technically there was dysfunction. And so the two of us became very close and were constantly asking each other, what do you think's going on? What do you think is happening? Are there parallel networks in the brain? Are there other ways of gaining access? And back then, and up until really recently, maybe in the last 15 years, prior to that period 15 years ago, the real understanding was that the human brain had so many brain cells that at a certain age you start losing those brain cells and you start losing function as you get older. Well, we know now that that's definitely not true, that the brain is very dynamic, that networks are being created every time we have a new experience, and that networks continue to be created in the brain up until the day we die. And so if there's a way of stimulating these networks, be it through whatever sensory system, and tying those sensory networks together, you create these really robust systems that people then use to live their daily lives. And the more robust the system, the more resilient the networks, the more we hold on to certain skills and abilities.
Wow.
And that's what gets me excited about the work and why we have this institute, really, as a way of bringing together those worlds of neuroscience and music and therapy.
Does that mean that a brain could live on longer than a body?
Well,
and be kept?
Do you think?
I think it could.
If what does a brain need to work? It needs electrical stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
It needs fluids. You know, there's enough nerves to pump up that stuff.
Wow, I mean,
Keep the brain in a jar and continue to
It's
experience.
a little scary, but
it is a little scary. Yeah, but it's
you know,
interesting.
remember there was a movie. I don't want to go too off track, but Johnny Got His Gun. Now this goes way back. This is when I was in college, so back in the 70s. But it was if you ever get a chance to see it, it was I don't know if it's Jeff Bridges or Jeff Bridges, one of those actors. But it was basically during the Civil War or one of those wars. A man is totally blown to pieces by shrapnel. Half of his face is gone, his eyes are gone, his ears are gone, everything is gone. And they asked the question, does the mind go on if there's no sensory input, if there's limited stuff? So they put this guy in the closet and hook him up to all kinds of tubes to keep his body alive so they could see how long a person can exist.
Oh my gosh.
And it gets to this really philosophical question, excuse me, about what does it mean to be alive? And eventually he does realize that he is alive, and he starts to feel the sun, you know, coming down on the from the window, so he knows night and day. He knows when the nurse comes in to change him into whatever, and he starts communicating with her because she realizes that he is alive. And he starts banging his head in Morse code to communicate and starts talking.
Wow.
And the doctors are now in this ethical dilemma about who is this person? Is he a person?
Wow.
Very philosophical. About so if you keep a brain alive,
Yeah.
what does that mean? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And to what end?
Yeah, to what end? It's a treasure trove. I mean, it's still there, right?
Right.
It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Or in the opposite case they were able to do in RoboCop, they were able to hook him back up to a body.
Yeah.
And he was still able to control it. Right? I sat on an interesting panel with David Duncan, who was speaking about if we had the possibility to capture all of the processes of the brain and encapsulate it in say a computer program, would you want to continue living for eternity, essentially experiencing what you could as a virtual reality computer?
Well, that's discussed in a new movie that just came out with Johnny Depp, right?
That's exactly what it
where
came
they
from.
essentially downloaded him into the system.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
well, there's lots of philosophical questions about what does it mean to be yourself,
And alive.
And a lot.
and what is life?
Right.
You know,
But that's interesting. I had
mean,
never
that's
heard that.
you have to see this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really timely when we talk about cyber, you know, minds and
Sure.
and systems.
The description that you gave, though, that the mind can continue to create and grow
Oh,
till the very end.
absolutely.
Very, very interesting. Which means that it could potentially grow beyond the expiration of our physical
Yeah.
side.
Well, that also provides hope for, I mean, at least ideally, right, that if there is some kind of damage or trauma to the brain, that there might be potential ways to build new pathways around that trauma, right?
That's really where our work started to really take hold, because we're working with people with cortical damage, somebody who has Alzheimer's disease. So when you think of the brain, you think usually about that outer shell, which is the cortex, but there's lots of inner areas too that make up how we experience things, and then the networks connect all those things from the brainstem up to the cortex, right? So the cortex is the thinking part of the brain, where we actually analyze what it is, but the gut feelings of what we have come from below the cortex,
Oh, wow.
right, in relation to past experiences and things like that. So somebody who has a damaged thinking mechanism, so to speak, may still be able to elicit a response based on memories and old feelings if it's triggered through another mean that still has salience to that person. So a sound, a smell, those historical markers that are truly connected to that experience will trigger that experience anew, but the person may be confused about why they think it's recognized because they can't process
why they have that, right? Oh, that's very interesting.
So what we figured out was if we used, for people with dementia, autobiographical music. That was a lot of my work in my
And so
dissertation.
autobiographical, you're meaning
Something
from
that's
their own personal
right,
life,
something
right?
that they relate other people to, that they relate events in their lives to, that they can sort of mark the course of their life
Oh, wow.
through music. And if I could use that music, would that person respond in a way that was meaningful to them and showed recognition, even though technically their memory was gone? And sure enough, that's what my doctoral dissertation was exactly on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it pointed to was that there's resiliency still in the brain that could be triggered through alternate mechanisms. And if you keep those mechanisms excited long enough, then it's possible then to either change the brain, to have it develop what's called a compensatory mechanism, where the brain changes how it is able to do something.
To compensate for that loss, right?
So you think of a child who was born with encephalitis. There's been studies about this. So a child's born with a huge amount of fluid on their brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's been imaging studies of kids who have these big hollow gapes of their brain from where fluid had been and it's drained. And if they did a functional imaging exam of the brain to see where language or different types of things were processed, it may be in a slightly different region that would be normal. So they might have feelings and sound processed at the back of their cortex instead of in the front temporal lobe. Or just the reorganization. The brain is very hooked on its real estate, and it allocates real estate very, in a very precise way. So if something's missing and it could regroup and do it differently with another part of the brain, it will, but it needs training and input to do that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So in a way, are the cells in the brain, I guess, able to be reprogrammed in that sense? So it's kind of like a blank slate that you can then kind of dynamically shift around?
There's been arguments about this. Some things are pre-programmed, I would say. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist. I just know this from reading and from talking to lots of neuroscientists, and also from years and years looking at people respond to music. But there's certain responses that we're programmed to react to in a certain way. For example, a fetus at 5 months before it's even born, so 5 months gestation, before it's born, is already processing beat, sound, and silence, and being able to recognize pattern changes in that sound. And that's important because when the child is born, the only way it could process sound and importance of sound in their environment is to be able to discern sound and silence and those patterns. So the only way they can understand their mother's language or important things in the environment is to hold their attention they need to be able to do that. So that's even before the child's born.
Wow.
Sensory systems don't get mapped until the child starts having parallel experiences. So taste and vision and auditory processing, all these things are independent systems until the child starts experiencing things simultaneously. And then those maps then become connected to each other. So a child with sensory integration disorder may not have a map that's been developed between vision and sound. So they may look at your face and hear you talk, but not hear the voice coming from your mouth because sound and face hasn't been established. Or they may have intense overwhelmingly sensory inputs that they can't control, that actually disrupt how they function.
Oh my gosh.
So it's very powerful. I mean, really interesting, very
stuff.
powerful stuff. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, babies before they're born experiencing sounds and then, patterns. What are your thoughts, and this is, don't want to take this off topic too much, but what are your thoughts on mothers who actually play music because we are in a music, panel here. What are your thoughts about mothers who actually play music? Because I've actually seen some very interesting apparatuses now where you can literally make a whole speaker on, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
I know from personal experience that children do remember things that they heard in utero. When I was doing my doctoral dissertation when I was 6-7 months pregnant with my first child, and I was using the accordion for those sessions, the poor kid. And so you can imagine, all these months of accordion playing on top of this little growing baby. And then when I was analyzing my tapes, I would play the tapes in the car so I could think about the music I played. And she was only like a year old or something like that. She goes, "Mommy, I love this music," and she knew it. She's like sort of bouncing along and the melodies and stuff. How could you possibly know this music? And then I realized that she was present the whole
time.
6 months or so I was doing this work,
Oh,
So, and then my husband and I played with a wind ensemble, and while I was pregnant for her, we were doing all these pieces and stuff. There was an opera singer who used to guest solo with us. And when she was a year old, the next summer, we took her to our rehearsal. She'd sit on the floor. This woman came by to sing, and my daughter was running all over the place and very noisy and playing around with things. As soon as this woman started singing, she crawled up in front of her and just sat down mesmerized.
Really?
I looked at her. So did she hear it? Did she process? I don't know. But I know that kids
do. And what was the age at this point?
Well, she was a year old. Yeah. So this is, we know that sound gets through. Whether the child is having a pleasant experience with it, whether it's doing something. There's some really good researchers up in Toronto, Sandra Treehop and Laurel Trainer, who are doing those exact studies. So if anybody's interested, they should look up their work, because that's really...
Yeah, I definitely am. I think that's very interesting. Because you always wonder if maybe if you play music for your children, they might have perfect pitch when they go.
Oh, yeah.
You just never know,
well,
right?
What is true, and I'm pretty sure any scientist would agree to this, is that the more sensory inputs a child is exposed to, the more varied their environment, the more creative their environment, the more chances they are to explore different things instead of just sameness. The more integrated their sensory system becomes. So if they have positive experiences, because they can have negative experiences with things that will also be encoded in a negative way. Mm-hmm. So it deals with the kids' ability to hear the sounds, or see colors or whatever it is. They don't see colors, I think, in the very beginning, or can't discern edges and stuff in the very beginning. But being able to process that, get joy out of it, and make those connections, and then you'll see a child develop very well.
Very interesting. So what is your method for, taking all this work that you've done, and all the studies that you've done, and now taking this into the Institute? So
Sure.
How do you assess patients and all of these kinds of things?
So at the Institute, we actually apply different methodologies or different methodologies of music therapy depending on the music therapist training. There's quite a few music therapists who work with me now. And so depending on the person's need and area of challenge or whatever, so to speak, we could either be very prescriptive in the use of music. So very prescriptive use of music would be to help a person with Parkinson's disease who isn't able to initiate movement. Through sound and pulse, we can actually stimulate a very specific part of the brain through the auditory system to turn on and allow that person to move. So purely by sound, purely by a beat, a person who's shuffling and can't really organize their movement that well will walk perfectly.
Really?
Okay, so that's just sound. So that's just using sound in a very specific way.
So just so no one missed this at home, it's possible to. Wow, that's amazing.
That clip it's it's there. So different from that is somebody who has very severe depression and has an illness that they're having a hard time dealing with. Their inability to cope with their life changes may impact their healing because they're fighting against the very thing that they need to have, which is I won't say positive output, but at least challenging themselves to get better. So this depression is getting in the way of their recovery. What is keeping them from being able to express those feelings in the way that they can deal with the feelings? Music can get really deep down in our hidden emotions, pre-verbal emotions, those feelings that we have a hard time articulating or even sharing with another person. Well, music therapists use improvisation in the moment to do very in-depth music psychotherapy that allows them to connect to that person and push them in a way that's safe to bring those feelings to the surface in a way that they can. It's almost like doing a Rorschach test with improvisation, where the person the patient is eliciting this musical response, maybe not sure quite of what they're telling you about their feelings, but you can hear resistance, you can hear fear, you can hear reservation in the way somebody plays, and you can reflect that back and push them. If the person is angry, you can get them to that point of expressing their anger just through an improvisation. Right. Or vocalizing fear or whatever, just by improvising. So that's the other extreme of music therapy, and we've really tried to understand both. Another area that we work really closely and have really good success is helping people who've lost their ability to communicate verbally because they've had a stroke. Usually this is a very specific type of stroke in an area of the brain called Broca's region. So our ability to put words together in a sentence really is dominated by an area in the left side of the brain, in the temporal region and also part of the motor strip. People who have a stroke specifically in that area may be able to understand everything that's being said to them, but for them to even say a word or put two words together to have meaning is very, very difficult. Those very people can sing lyrics to songs perfectly because singing and melody are dominant on the right side of the brain. So there's a language homologue, a parallel area in the right side of the brain that basically has the same stuff as the left side. It just was never developed for speaking. It was developed for music perception and patterns of sound. So we could use singing and words embedded in song and the movement of words in song to help that person speak again.
Wow.
And people do.
By making a new connection, by remapping. That's really amazing.
So that's what the Institute does.
Wow.
Is really looking at what we know about music in the brain, and then using that knowledge to create therapeutic programs that allow us to help people in a broad range of problems.
Oh, that's amazing. That really is amazing.
Absolutely. So Jason was asking about the process. I was wondering, how do you find out if how do you assess if somebody is eligible to this type of treatment?
So good example, somebody who has aphasia. This is the speech problem. And you could tell by trying to talk with them that they really can't say anything. One of our assessment tools, we know that the motor system is very, very connected to speech. And there's two things. We can ask them to sing something simple, like a folk song or a children's song or happy birthday or something, a phrase of a song, to see if they have the word, if they could sing words in melody. We also see if they could just tap in the rhythm of the phrase. There's some studies that we've done, we saw that a person who can tap actually can benefit from this singing type therapy, and it could be because the motor area of the brain has been so damaged that integration of motor function and speed and word production that's so crucial to be able to speak has been damaged, and we may use a different technique for that person. If a person's depressed, that's a whole, or has some deep psychological issues, that could be a very long stretched out assessment to try to get to the underpinning of the origins of that problem. If somebody's in pain, it may be as simple as helping them not to get distracted, but just having them find the music that makes them feel good. There's been some really good neuroimaging studies that when you listen to music that you love that's very pleasurable, the brain gets flooded with dopamine and serotonin in the very areas of the brain that make you feel good, feel better. And we also know that there's some tracts that get shut down. So if somebody has pain in the periphery on their hand, leg, or something like that, and they're listening to music that they like, that signal may be gated or closed because now their brain is overwhelmed by listening to music.
Oh, wow.
That's why dentists and people, a lot of research on music and pain was actually done by anesthesiologists and dentists many years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And music therapists have been using this as well, but a lot of the research about pain moderation with music has been done in the clinics for a long time.
Wow.
So it makes sense. Because every time I go to the dentist, they
do.
They play music all the
part
time.
of their protocol.
Soothing music, yeah. How
As long as it's not the dentist music, then you should pick it up.
Right. It depends on the dentist,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
You were
Heavy
saying
metal for
certain patients have very long assessment periods. How long would you say is long?
It's long. Well, hopefully not a lifetime.
Right.
Some people who really have issues can be with a psychotherapist for a very long time. In our institute, we do work with people within our health system as well as people who get referred to us. In many cases, it's an acute problem, very specific. So a person recently had a stroke. We'll see whether we can help them with movement, regaining physical function. We use a lot of electronic music technology to where we can use digital drum pads.
Sure.
Get a person who has very weak motor ability and create an environment where they can have really good success doing very tiny movements, just to see if they could do that, and over time eventually change the position of the digital pad so they can increase their range of motion and maybe their motor control. We can plug it into a Mac and figure out how they're doing in real time, if their finger movements, if their dexterity is improving, from one session to the next. So depending, again, it really depends on the individual, what the problem is. If music can be very prescriptive and help them in the moment very quickly, like I said, with somebody with a gait problem, usually we're looking at a very specific goal in the beginning, but it could be, as we do the assessment, that other things unfold. Maybe the person's initiation of movement is really because they have balance problems, or maybe some other problems too, or maybe cognitively. They've become so slow that they can't think about moving. Somehow that mechanism about putting one step in front of the other just isn't consciously there. And so we have to create an environment where they could be successful.
Wow. Have you ever used, or I don't know if you're familiar with these or not, but there are MIDI controllers that are just flat surfaces, and then you can run your finger up and down to go and do different pitches. I don't know if that was something that you maybe used in your...
We haven't used that specific one. We have an ultrasound beam, something called the sound beam, that was created in England actually for interactive arts program with dance and movement to be done in the theater. And somebody had seen this and said, boy, I have some kids with developmental delays and physical problems that would love to be able to create music with these devices. And so basically what it is a little sort of microphone-shaped thing that projects a sound beam into space. And every time you break the beam, a different MIDI event happens.
Oh, wow.
So you can create what that MIDI event is. It could be a scale, and so every time, and it could be longitudinal too. So a piano, you can create a piano going across space where each note is a separate tone, or you can create events. Some people have used it with children's theater, where one break could be the squeaky door opening in a haunted house, and the next one could be the scream. All those kinds of, so whatever you could do with MIDI software, you can create and use this as a MIDI controller.
This is a laser beam?
It's a ultrasound beam.
Oh, ultrasound.
That is
So
really
it's basically, because I used to think it was laser tube. It's not light based.
It's not infrared either.
No,
it's
no,
It's an ultrasound.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really amazing.
Yeah.
And you've had success with that using it with your patients?
Yeah,
really?
absolutely. People who had very limited range of motion, or there's something too when somebody has a head trauma, where they lose their what's called proprioception. That's where their body is in space. So they may feel like they're really extending their arm, and maybe it just goes this far.
Oh, wow.
But they can actually extend it further. They just can't feel where that is because of nerve damage in the arm.
Oh,
So if you create a spot in space that is their target sound, and it doesn't happen until they get to that space, eventually they start to integrate internally that this movement is how far they have to go
to get to that.
to extend their arm fully. And eventually they start to integrate then the sense of where their body is in space.
Wow.
So you can imagine an older person who has vision problems or maybe has poor balance and doesn't know when their foot's touching the floor because they've lost feelings in their foot, in the sole of their foot. If you could play a sound or have them walk on the mat that produces a sound, they won't hear that sound until they actually make contact. And after a while, that timing of how long it takes for them to go from one step to the other will start to get reintegrated as a pattern that they can then use to walk properly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So those kinds of feedback loops are really possible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That really, really is.
Yeah.
Huh.
Do you see? I wonder how to phrase this. These effects on people that haven't been diagnosed with any sort of medical problems. Like, would there be quantitative preventative?
Oh, absolutely. So using music as a way of enhancing memory function. Say somebody is starting to become a little forgetful. Usually they forget their telephone number, maybe they forget names. We all know about mnemonics, how you can use, and we use music all the time, right, in jingles for commercials. You put a melody to a phone number and it helps you remember the phone number, right? I mean, that's commercial.
Yeah.
Have
Jingles
done it for years. Yeah. So you can help a person create these patterns of things that help them recall things from time to time.
Oh, interesting.
So they might have a little jingle for their phone number. They might have one for the whatever. You can also help a person. Really great way of using music as a preventable learning tool for healthy. I don't want to say normal because everybody's normal within their own frame of
context.
I sure think so.
Right. But imagine somebody who has a hard time hearing voices at a party.
Yes.
And being able to really pick out that sound. You can do something as simple, not simple, but you can have that person listen to, say, a symphonic recording, symphony orchestra, and have them listen to what the oboe's doing, or have them listen to what the cello's doing. And as they improve their discernment and discrimination of those different inner layers, they actually improve their hearing acuity.
Really?
You may have just saved my relationship.
but that's the way of doing it, and even being able to hear things. I won't go into. We could do a session later if you really have problems.
We'll table that one for later.
But that's how you could really use it.
Okay.
Well, it's just interesting how you're putting things into a different context to then inform.
Well, when
what you're
people have
doing.
problems,
Very
it's
logical.
usually that when somebody has a challenge, it's usually because they're not going about it in a way that uses the skill set that they do have.
Mhm.
And so they're challenged because their body or their mind can't process that specific information that way. But if you go about it a different way and introduce it differently, then the person says, "Oh, is that what you were talking about?
Right.
Now I got it." So it's about looking at all those different mindsets or different approaches to understanding that all of us have.
Mm.
It's just a matter of finding for that individual which works for them.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
It really, really is. So the treatment that you have, that you're working at your institute, how would you say that could then be replicated in other places? Because you always think about, you hear great schools, you hear great programs, you hear all these things, and a lot of times people will say, well, could it just be because you're the great person there? I mean, how can you take these techniques and then
Well, the
replicate it?
theory, I think at this point, now I've been a music therapist now for 36 years. We've had hundreds of students. The field of music therapy has grown, too. And the understanding of neurologic underpinnings of music perception has grown. And I think music therapists around the world are becoming knowledgeable of the scope. I'd like to think I've influenced a few of them, but I can't take credit for everything. And there's lots of colleagues of mine who've done this as well, who've been looking at the neuroscience of music perception. And I think the enrichment of music therapists and people in healthcare and in education who are starting to really understand how much music can do to help integrate sensory systems is becoming known throughout the world. And people are finding ways to replicate that information or the models. Neuroscientists have been studying very specific applications of music as well. So, for example, using music for people with aphasia is an area that a couple of neuroscientists are really focusing their work on. And I think as their papers come out and as people are educated by that, then other therapists will be able to pick that up as well. So I'm hoping that years of giving lectures and speaking has informed a greater body of people of the efficacy of what it is that we do, so other music therapists are taking advantage of it.
Well, it's great to hear that the community has grown so much and continues to grow. Is there a lot of, I guess, collegial sharing in this network?
It's like the arts. I think, there's some people who think they own something. It's their method, their work, and you can only train with them to be privy to that information. And there's other people who are very collegial. I'm hoping I'm one of those who likes to share and hope that people can take advantage of that knowledge to expand it. I think for the first time in the past few years that the medical community, that the arts community, everybody's rallying behind this effort to really understand music and the brain and how it helps in development. So it's not just the music therapists and people treating with music, but people across a broad spectrum of professions who really want to understand this. I think neuroscientists got involved in it because it was a way of understanding complex systems. And that's what got them excited about studying music, because it's hard to understand how we can respond to something that takes a whole brain to process. And that's where the scientific community came in. So I think all these things in parallel are going to help people to replicate applications and create new applications that can be used really through early childhood development, through taking care of elders who are starting to lose memory.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty interesting. I never really thought that, I mean, it makes sense through talking to you, but that to really respond to music and create music, you really are using so many facets of the brain to do that.
Absolutely.
Motor skills. And
Everything.
Yeah.
There's a scientist once who was asked, and he said he didn't want to put it on record because he was a scientist, and scientists never just make statements. It always has to have, proof. But a person playing the musical instrument, reading the piece of music. So think about everything that it takes to be able to play in the moment from a sheet of music, processing the graphics, or playing with another person, where you are actually predicting how they're going to change, how they're going to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Every single part of the brain is lit up. It looks like the brain is on fire.
Really?
Because every single system is turned on in that moment with auditory processing, with motor timing processing, with analytical processing and predictive processing, feelings, emotions. Every single thing in that moment is turned on.
Wow.
It's probably the healthiest thing we could do, is to
Yeah.
play music.
Huh.
That's why we should.
And there's ways of scanning this to see actually which
In
one's
fact,
later?
this is really brand new. In fact, there's a wonderful new place up at McMaster University in Toronto that Laurel Trainer just announced at one of these conferences we were at, an integrated science center where you can have an audience filled with people who are having their EEGs done in real time as they respond to a symphonic orchestra.
Really?
You
Wow.
know,
That's
right now there's
Yeah.
there's the capability of using these very basic digital EEG systems
Mhm.
to map what a person's doing when they're playing a duet with somebody.
Hmm.
And you can actually see, or talking to another person, you can actually see how the other person's brain is mirroring and responding in real time. So we're never really acting
Or
in
not.
solo, or not. But we're never. It's almost like we can't be with another person and not connect unless we had a serious neurological problem. Something is happening.
Wow.
That's-
Okay, that's what
that's-
that interplay looks like.
Oh, there's some good look. You can
Yeah.
look them up. I mean,
Yeah.
after you finish post some, there's quite a few nice brand new studies
Hmm.
looking at this duality of. Yeah,
Yeah,
if you look
that's-
up like mirror neurons and things, how we.
Mirror neuron.
Yeah, it's a whole system.
Yeah. Okay.
So how good example of that is when you're watching somebody watching the Olympics and somebody's going down the luge
Yep.
and you're feeling as if
Right.
you're moving,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
I do that all the time.
Right.
You watch somebody do something, you can almost feel viscerally the air going against your body and
Or if they
make
use
it do that,
lemon.
right? And you get that sour taste, right?
Yeah.
So those are mirror neurons. We're not physically experiencing it, but somehow through our memory and past experiences, we sort of could gauge what that feeling is like, and so our brains produce it.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Kind of when your mouth waters when you walk into
that's
or
all.
smell
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Mirror
yeah,
neurons.
yeah.
Very interesting.
What about use of the other senses in terms of like I know you were saying something about using sound as for somebody that's walking,
Right, right,
to sense where the foot is touching
Right,
the ground.
right.
What about using the other senses like light? Would
Right.
that be effective?
Yeah,
Like flashing lights and things like that, or
Yeah.
color therapies and.
it has a different effect.
Mhm.
There has been research about spectrum of light and what it does. There's something called brain entrainment that deals with how these signals entrain brain rhythms, EEGs, right? So light can do that. And if you're flashing light into the retina, whatever, the part of the brain that processes the eyes and the occipital lobe, those neurons are going to start firing in that pattern. So say somebody has very fast EEG, say they're really restless and can't settle down. This goes back to the old biofeedback type stuff. So instead of just watching the beep on the screen and trying to slow yourself down, you're getting visual signals that are slow, and you're getting auditory beats that are slow, and before you know it, your brain starts entraining to the slower rhythm and slowing yourself down so you become relaxed.
Really?
Yeah. Or you can excite if you really want to be creative and you're in a lull and can't get
Really?
yourself moving, you can actually turn it up a notch.
Really?
But yeah.
I'll have to use that trick at home. Calm myself down. That's
Oh yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
interesting.
No, seriously, it's
So is that kind of why soft, slower
This been-
music will then bring you down and relax?
Yeah. unless you're a very anxious person, and sometimes you have
You
to
need more.
you need the music to meet you where you're at to sort of dissipate the anxiety.
Oh, interesting.
That's why a lot of teenagers will
special playlist.
Very high energy playlist to sort of relax. And
Oh.
parents with teenagers say, how can my kid relax to that high powered music? It's because they really need to dissipate the energy. It's the only way they could do it. It's actually very relaxing for them.
I never thought about that.
Yeah. So good studies on this. I mean, there's lots of research on it.
I've heard folks speak about sacred tones as well as binaural beats.
Right.
What are your thoughts on
Well,
both of those?
I can't speak specifically to sacred tones because depending on the culture, even if you're talking about chakras or you're talking about certain frequencies, I can talk to the idea that frequencies do resonate in certain parts of the body. I've done research with something called physioacoustics that uses low frequency sound, and it was based on some research done in Finland where certain frequencies of sound that are resonant with certain parts. Every part of our body resonates to different frequencies. That's, I think, where the chakras and all those came from. So certain body organs have a certain resting frequency, and which, just like anything, if you were to vibrate this cup at one certain frequency, it'll start making spirals or different shapes. If it was a glass, it would actually ring at a certain frequency, right? So the human body also has resting frequencies. So in our work, people who've had surgery or have a disease that causes muscle spasms, there's certain frequencies that actually cause the tissues of the muscle to vibrate at those frequencies. And so if a person had back pain, for example, we have this chair that has this physioacoustic stuff in it, and if you hit a frequency of 40 to 45 hertz, which is the frequency at which the very thick muscles of the back vibrate, they'll get a deep tissue massage because all the fibers of their muscles would start sympathetically vibrating to that sound. So if you start thinking about the human body and about sound frequency, if you're stuck and have pain because of a muscle spasm, and there's a sound frequency that can relax that muscle to the point that you don't need to take, Advil or Tylenol or something. You could just do it with sound. It's like ultrasound therapists use to do this, but there's this low frequency sound that does it a lot deeper.
Wow.
And so you can see where if your body is out of sync, and that's where these healing sounds, I think, come from, is they to center the frequency of a certain part of the body that may be out, is bringing those harmonies together, or bringing it to a more harmonious state. There's a great mathematician, scientist up in McGill, Leong Glass, who's been studying the algorithms of how all the different body rhythms talk to each other. So there's a heart rhythm, there's a brain rhythm, there's a blood flow rhythm, there's muscle twitch rhythms, and when your system is ill, those rhythms change, or they may trigger changes or overexcitement in another system. So if your heart rhythm is off, it's going to trigger another response someplace else, and you can actually predict disease by how these rhythms get adjusted or alternate.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I have to think about that. That's pretty amazing
Oh
stuff.
yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, that's there's a lot for me to wrap my head around that.
So I never discount when somebody's talking about healing rhythms or something else, because there is, science and thousands of years of history behind all of that.
Hypnotism even?
Could be.
Yeah.
Subconscious states, subconscious, yeah.
Wow.
Because we have lots of hidden things going on in our minds that hidden because we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
Even hallucination?
That could be triggered too.
Synesthesia.
Synesthesia is another system. Synesthesia brings us into that sensory mapping I was talking about, how it gets developed. Well, sometimes it gets mapped the wrong way. So, for example, instead of the temporal lobe, say the neurons in the temporal lobe will give us perception of very exact pitch, right? So now these neurons, instead of triggering pitch, are somehow triggering taste.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
And so, when you hear A440, you start thinking lemons and sound.
Really?
Oh yeah. Synesthesia is how these sensory maps get wired the wrong way or differently.
Wow.
And so there's a great book about the boy who tasted shapes.
Hmm.
You know,
Oh, wow.
would taste lemons and would feel square or round. You know, Scriabin had synesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
His tower that he was creating was all based on some mystical sensory system, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, and his music absolutely was with colors and.
Oh.
Speaking of
Dramatic.
colors, what are your thoughts of those who hear in color? Because that's
Well, there's two different things, because some people have synesthesia. So some people actually see a color with certain frequency vibrations. And again, that's how they normally respond, because that's how their brain has been wired. So somebody may hear A440 and see blue. But another person with synesthesia may hear A440 and see a different color.
Mhm.
So that isn't a given. It's how their brain is developed, right? Yeah, all of that it's so interesting.
yeah, because I've always heard in color, you know.
Have you?
Yeah, and it's just very interesting to me.
Mm.
And when I
And is it always the same color
Yeah.
for each?
it is, yeah.
So you made that
And it's
something to look at.
it's strange, and I've talked to other people about it who say that they can hear in color as well, and all,
Mhm.
and but our colors are always different,
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so I thought maybe we were lying to each other.
Yeah,
Like,
no, but
what-
it may be an associative thing that you learn to do early
Mhm.
on. Certain people feel certain sensations with certain keys,
Mm, yep.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Brightness.
I mean, I remember talking to somebody when digital keyboards started becoming more available. People at Yamaha that were developing
Mhm.
digital keyboards and sampling sounds. One of the challenges was to get the nuance of, in the well-tempered piano when
Mhm.
Beethoven was writing,
Mhm.
the air vibrations of the keyboard against the violin
Mm.
would sound different in certain keys.
Right.
Mm.
And so E flat would sound completely different with violin and piano
Mhm.
than another key. And so Beethoven was very sensitive to those nuances
Mhm.
of what it felt like.
Oh, wow.
And so wrote in very specific keys to get that nuance of the vibrations between the string instrument and the new tempered clavier.
Wow.
So with digital keyboard design, sampling those types of feelings, how they
Mm.
do it. I mean, they've gotten better at it, but you know,
Awesome.
what we hear in sound is all because of what's vibrating in the air.
Right.
And if there's no
Yeah.
vibration, what is it?
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know? I mean, one of the questions that came up is our auditory system changing with digital music.
Yeah.
Are we starting to hear more pure pitch
Mhm.
because that's what's being produced? Or are there, I know that a lot of manufacturers are doing lots of harmonics in each of their tones and the
Right.
samples.
Mhm.
So you get the richer sound. You're not hearing just a tone like on a...
Even the timing of the
Yes,
harmonics,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that's where the sampling comes in.
Mhm.
And so they've gotten better at that. But it's all perception.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
It's very, very
Yeah.
interesting.
So speaking of, I was gonna say E flat. She must have read my mind. When you hear E flat,
Yeah.
what color?
I'd have to hear it. I can't. It doesn't just come to me. For me, that's always been kind of like a yellow.
Oh, I was gonna say orange.
That's funny. Well, same spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always been yellow.
Yeah.
Let's try.
Yeah.
Speaking
So
of
so
challenges,
read those
then.
books. You
Yeah, I
love
will.
them.
I've
It's-
always just been very fascinated by it because
Synesthesia. Look, it's
Yeah.
very fascinating.
So
It
I
happens
love
with
closing
taste.
my
It has
eyes.
with touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always just loved closing my eyes when I listen to music
Now,
just because of that.
there's a whole
colors.
field of sound therapy,
Mhm.
different from music therapy. People who've been looking at light and sound for a long time, more about what these vibrations and how it affects
Mm.
harmony in the body.
Mhm.
But because people do have very strong sensory experiences with light too,
Right. And with taste.
and with taste as well.
Yeah. All,
Yeah.
Wow.
all of them.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty fascinating
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Can't take it for granted. There's too
No.
much going on.
I did a class a month ago at Berklee College of Music where I was attempting to teach perfect pitch,
Oh,
but I had people memorize tastes for a week long. You know,
Oh.
give them specific things and say, all right, taste that, remember it as we think about this pitch and relate it and this color and put them
Did
all
they get
together.
it?
They did.
I'm
At the
sure
end of the
they
week,
did. Yep.
all of them got
So that's when you
Yeah.
talk about sensory enhancement.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have trouble with remembering a certain thing or recalling it, if you pair it with another strong sensory input,
I had no
it
idea.
reinforces It reinforces the signal.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the more associations you can have with something, the harder it is to not get it.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah, because you're building all these kind of complementary mechanisms, right?
and
Right.
cues
Yeah.
to help you recall.
Point
it.
of reference,
Yeah,
yeah.
point of reference, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Well, that's fantastic.
muscle memory.
Yeah.
all
So
the-
maybe there still
Absolutely.
is hope for me rather to get perfect pitch every
Absolutely.
time.
Do you want it? I always shy to. I used to have perfect pitch, but
Yeah.
when I'm playing in so many different keys and transposing,
Yeah.
I can't.
I can't play any instruments that aren't in concert. Well, I can't
Oh,
read them.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
play in lots of different keys all the
Mhm.
time, and so I'll always just transpose whatever the person will tell me it's in a certain key, and I'll just transpose it on site.
Yeah.
Because if I thought that the C I was looking at was actually a B flat, I would go crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that is that. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's right.
Because when it comes to trumpets, I can hear notes very, very accurately.
Yeah.
Really
I can,
slob with the.
I can always feel because it feels a certain way
Right.
to me.
Mhm.
you know?
Even though it's called something different,
Yeah.
because I have like 5 or 6 different trumpets too, and they're all in
course.
different keys. And
But I feel it. The way it resonates coming out of the
Yeah.
bell. It's
You know
just-
what the-
It's a signature. It feels like a signature of the
right,
sound.
right.
Right.
You know, but I have difficulty with other instruments. With
Huh.
that same thing. I like have the connection with brass. Well, I mean, specifically
Yeah, yeah,
trumpets.
yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do we have time for our game?
Oh,
Do we
oh, sure.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
see, because we've got only a couple minutes left
Okay.
here, I guess.
Absolutely.
Speaking of sounds and recognizing sounds.
Exactly. So what we did was we put together a little playlist here, and you have a couple signs here that
Oh,
you
okay,
can
so
hold
you
up.
put me on the spot.
Basically, yes. All we were going to do is
I'll
play a
play
couple like musical examples, and you have the option of holding up a yes, a no, or an unknown.
Okay,
In terms
okay.
of whether you think this might be helpful
Oh,
for
okay,
somebody.
okay.
So here's our first example.
So I just stop. I'll give you an example.
Whenever you're
for
ready.
that.
Yes.
Okay.
Got a yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you want me to give the example?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So a person I know had aphasia. Couldn't speak for 2 years. Found out that he could sing. Happy birthday. Said, why can I sing and not speak? So he started to think about all the classical music he knew.
Mm.
And Beethoven's Fifth, da 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 da, was in his mind, and he said, how are you today? And it came out. So all these themes that was so well preserved became cues for him to put
Really?
phrases that he couldn't speak.
And so to speak, he had to essentially sing going
He
forward.
sings, and
Yeah.
there's a great video of him on our YouTube, Harvey Alter,
Oh, interesting.
giving a whole speech where he technically says he's singing the whole time.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing that.
But Beethoven's Fifth was perfect, the beginning. That's exactly
Fantastic.
what it was.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's move on. How about this one?
I'm gonna say yes to all of them, you know that. Okay, so that's gonna be my problem. I'm gonna win your game because for every single piece of music, no matter how strange or how wonderful, there's a therapeutic possibility. So with jazz and with something that where the beat's there, but it's sort of free flowing. Movement, improvisation, sort of losing yourself in the moment. Somebody who really has a hard time letting go. This could be very freeing for them.
Imagine that. So it's a
Could be arousing. Even when we think about older people with dementia, sometimes we think that only their music can help them.
Mm-hmm.
But yet you play a great jazz piece and you'll see they'll start moving around because it's novel. Maybe they heard it, but maybe they weren't really connected to it. And the sound is so interesting that they just gravitate to the sound and start spontaneously moving.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
Well, shall we move on?
Yeah, we'll
we
go on
go.
to the next.
And I'll just keep...
It's a great tune.
Yeah. Yeah, so... So, okay. So all of these, like I said, I'm ruining your test because each one of these
has its own
meaning. So there's a couple of things that happen in music therapy. Sometimes there's something called lyric analysis, where, just like a Rorschach test, a person listens to a song and interprets it. And usually their interpretation is flavored by their own feelings, how they perceive what the person's going through or what they're saying. Did this person just lose somebody they care about? Do they want somebody that they can't have? It comes out in the interpretation of the song, but at the same time they're revealing very deep feelings they maybe couldn't have shared. We work with a lot of young people where songwriting is very important. So, you know, whatever the genre of the music is, be it hip hop or whatever, will be the modality or the genre that they'll write in as well.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you find that certain age groups gravitate towards certain types of music, or
certain in popular music? I mean, there's been really good studies about this. That the music that we tend to remember the best and respond to the best are the songs, pop songs, that were popular during our teenage years to early 20s. So it's the music that represents our coming of age that we've gravitated to, and even at all the radio stations do this. They'll, you know, you can tell their demographic by the music they play.
Yeah.
Because of that genre. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of
until the music goes to the oldie station.
No, but the oldies, but the oldie stations change
every
10 years.
Exactly.
I mean, they really do.
Yeah.
Right now, the oldie station is playing disco.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
even music from the 90s.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's
Absolutely.
I know it's really scary. No, but we were talking, you know. So it does change by generation. What is different is people who have who are interested in jazz, and even that can be, you know, classified by decades as well.
Very
You know,
interesting.
when Miles Davis was big, or, you know, songs that people would know really well from him, as opposed to somebody contemporary who they may not be aware of at all. So
That's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I learned so much just
me too.
sitting
Yeah,
here.
And we could go
the
on for a
last
couple
hour.
hours.
Oh, I
This
would
is
love to.
yeah.
And I'm sure all of our viewers would love to keep
Yeah.
hearing your stories and keep
Yeah.
listening in. But unfortunately for this installment, we are at our time limit. But I want to say a big thank you
Oh, sure,
to
my pleasure.
Dr. Tomaino and Dr. Gaines for stopping in and sharing the information and
Pleasure.
sharing your wonderful stories and of inspiring people and healing people through music. It's something that we hope we can share with the whole world, and that people will continue to, you know, that see this video will share with others.
Yeah, absolutely.
That there is a wonderful natural healing process out there with something that's available to everyone.
That's right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. Yeah, thank you for being
Thanks,
with us
Jason.
today.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
So again, this is the K-20 Forum. We're live at Life After Dark Studio with Jason Gaines, Dr. Connie Tomaino. Please tune in, stay tuned. Facebook/Life After Dark Studio. We'll be posting links to the Center for Music and Neurologic Function and Connie Tomaino and some of her videos. And there will be lots more interesting musical activities coming to you live from New York City.
Good.
Thank you
Thank you,
again.
everybody.